Hello and welcome to the PMC podcast, where PMC stands for Project Management Conversations. I have Carleton with me today, who comes in with an experience of over 2 decades in program and portfolio management. He possesses expertise in the field of business strategy, consulting, information technology, among others. And today we are going to be talking about change management and specifically focus on how you, as a project manager, can overcome the resistance that you're going to face from your stakeholders in introducing change, of course. And Carlton has this beautiful map that you would be seeing on your screen right now. And that's what we would be discussing in more details. But before we go there, Carlton, if you could briefly introduce yourself to our audience, that would be great.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for having me on the podcast. As you heard, I've had about 25 years of experience running projects. By this stage, I think I've lost count of the number of projects I've actually run. I started in IT projects and then went on to larger projects, some of which have been anything from very political in terms of doing something a government wanted to multinational. One of them was servicing 3 different navies,
Wow.
globally wide, that kind of thing. So I have this fairly wide range of experiences with stakeholders, and that's one of the reasons I wrote this article. Was one of the things you come across over and over is the way stakeholders react to what it is you're presenting them at the time.
Right, right. So good. So good to have you here, Carlton. And uh, before we go into the thick of the things, I want to mention why change management is so important for us as project managers, project leaders, program managers, right? You see, the very outcome of every single project out there is some kind of change. In fact, ensuring that the change is introduced in a process driven and is controlled manner, that is a big part of project management itself. Now people
In
don't like. Go
my
ahead, you want to.
apologies. Yeah,
Oh, go
but
ahead.
you're exactly right. The very definition of a project is a temporary endeavor that changes something, that delivers something. And unless it's a very, very strange project, it always involves people. In fact,
Right.
I don't think I've ever come across one that didn't have any people in it. it's it's always a way of handling a bunch of people who are going to get something new, and sometimes they will like it and sometimes they won't, which we will talk
Right.
about in depth a bit more. Yeah.
Awesome. And it's good that you mentioned people, because that was something that I was going to talk about. And people don't like changes. That's a fact. And you, as a project manager, you are at the helm of this change, right? You are in the driver's seat. So, throughout the course of your project and even after completion, your stakeholders, your team members, they might display some uneasiness, some unhappiness towards change. And as a leader, it is your responsibility to ensure stakeholder satisfaction, right? So Carlton has this entire journey of change mapped out beautifully. And I'd like to start off by asking this. So, how did you come across the change curve and the change adoption curve that you mentioned? And what made you realize that, they can be applicable to project management as well?
Well, one of the things you encounter very often is exactly what you're talking about. It's this resistance to change. And a lot of that is based in fear of the unknown. And I was fortunate enough to work with some professional change managers once or twice who had a background in psychology. So I was introduced to Elizabeth Kübler-Ross's grief cycle, which has been widely applied in change too. And it's the mourning for the thing you used to have.
Right.
And you often find this. I've seen it everywhere, from people getting new software to um, a bridge being built somewhere. And well, it wasn't like that before, and we're now mourning it. And it is that grief expressed in terms of a project, which is the resistance that you find there. It's that they fear what's coming because they don't know it. They don't know, they're not familiar with it, they're not comfortable with it, and they don't know what it means to them yet. And that is always where the pushback comes from. And because I noticed this over and over in projects, and when I saw this change graph, I thought, wow, this is great. And when you start applying that to the way different people react to it, you start to see patterns emerging. You start to see the early adopters, so the guys that will jump most of that curve. They will go, I'm so excited about this, I'm going right to the other side.
Yeah.
And Gartner, you produce a wonderful thing called the hype curve, which is fairly similar. You find a lot of excitement at the beginning, and then it dies off, and there are all kinds of difficulties further on. And change is very similar. You've got the early adopters who will dive in and be your best friends, and they're the ones you need to identify right at the beginning because they're on your side with the project. They're your best friends because they'll be out there in the community or the user group or whatever it is, and they'll be the ones saying, look, we really need to get ahead. We must do this because it's going to be so good for us. And at the other end of the market, you've got those people that only want the old way. And I mentioned one of those in the article, and that one always sticks with me is receiving a letter in the post that said, 7 years ago, I had this report and I want it back. And, things just don't change there. There's some people that will hold on to that old idea as long as possible.
Yeah.
And-
So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and part of your skill as a project manager dealing with the change is understanding that there are people that are different like that. It's understanding that on the one hand, you're going to have your friends who are going to help you with the project, and you're going to have the people whose behavior is going to be difficult because they don't want the change.
Right. And you have this mapped out very beautifully in this 5 points or 5 phases, I must say. We can focus on each one of those phases. I'd like to start off with the first phase of sort, that is early hype or early shock, and even denial, right? So, how do you identify and engage with early adopters? Because that's one thing that you mentioned, who are your friends, right?
Yes.
So during the initiation of a project, you want to build this positive momentum, and you have some people who are with you. They are the early adopters. How can you identify them? How do you engage with them?
So, two things I'll say about that. First is in the early stages, it's vitally important that you have executive leadership um, behind your project and visibly behind your project, particularly with the larger projects where you've got a big change going on in an organization. You want the CEO or one of the senior managers to be very enthusiastic about the project. And the problem you find on a lot of projects is you get a steering committee and a project sponsor who's been tapped on the shoulder by somebody, as in you're the project sponsor for this. They're not really enthusiastic about it, and that's a red flag already. Where you've got enthusiastic management, you get enthusiastic people under them who will want to say what their managers are saying. That's a good start. That's the first thing. The second thing is early communication. You really do need to, if you subscribe to something like the Prosky ADKAR technique, which is fairly widely used in change circles, the very first thing, the A in ADKAR, is awareness. So it's really that early stage of making people aware that your project is there. And that comes down to talking in the language they understand. Do you have to have a town hall where you stand in front of everyone? Do you need to send out an email because everybody reads email? Is it something that goes out via Instagram because that's the way your company works? Whatever it is.
So communication is the key, essentially. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin here, right? How do you handle stakeholders that exhibit signs of denial, or they are essentially resistant to change? And we are right now in the early stages, right? We are in the phase 1 of this 5 phases, right? So how do you manage these people who are in denial or who are essentially exhibiting some kind of resistance to change?
The first thing you have to do with those people is understand what their issue is. Usually the denial is, oh, this is never going to work. And then the bigger political projects, you sometimes have to look at what is the motivation behind the denial, because in a big political project, I did one that was involving recycled water where people didn't want to drink it. And the naysayers were people that were being driven by a political party. So there was a very strong political motive behind
Wow.
it. You've got to understand those things. If you don't have that kind of thing, and they are real fears that the person has got, that's
Mhm.
the new system isn't going to do what they need it to do, or the bridge isn't going to be strong enough to handle the traffic, or whatever it
Right,
is,
right.
then you really need to bring those people into the circle. And the best way to do that is to form contact groups. The sort of user group that you find on an IT project quite often, who are voice of the customer, essentially. They're the people who come in and say, look, I can't use the system like that because, and they'll give reasons. And sometimes they're valid reasons and you need to think about them. But other times you can explain why they're not going to be doing it that way. And it's a chance to engage in meaningful discussion. And what it does for them is it allows them to be heard. So it's important to them because they feel, oh, I'm being heard by the people on the other who are bringing this change. So my concerns will be noted. and I
Yeah.
think that's important.
Okay. And then secondly, you move to another phase, which is frustration. So, how do you address the frustration that even some of the early adopters might face that because it's something new, right? And then there are your stakeholders who are resistant to change as well. So, as the project progresses, how do you address this frustration that might be brewing?
This is probably the hardest part of the cycle
Hmm.
because at this stage, if you've been communicating regularly, people are no longer believing your communication because they're not seeing all the promised stuff emerging straight away. Your early adopters are getting frustrated now because they're at the point where they think, oh, we've got all this great stuff. Why don't we have it already?
Right.
And, well, bridges take time to build. Recycled water has to have pipelines laid that takes years to do sometimes.
Hmm.
And people get frustrated. And the only thing you can really do with that is be very clear in your communication of what timelines and results are going to look like. So if you're clear early on, there's less of that frustration because then people understand clearly that things are not going to happen quickly. Yes, you're always going to have people that go, oh, but why isn't it here yet? Or and then you've got the other group, which are the complete naysayers who haven't come
Right.
across to your side. You will get the hard resistors that will last till the end, and they are the people who are getting frustrated now because they can see changes on its way. And then they're the ones you just have to work with and hopefully convert to your way of thinking.
Right. Um, for better understanding sake, I mean, it would be great if you could give an example from your personal experience, maybe specifically of this frustration phase, because it intrigued me, to be honest.
Oh, okay. I can't name any names or companies in this one because
Sure.
it's fairly imperative, but I was working on a very large software implementation at one stage, and one of the senior managers did not like the direction, the process, and the way things were going, and actually banged his head on a table during a steering committee meeting and shouted, "I do not want this system." And yeah, you do get those people. I mean, that's a fairly extreme example, but there are people who are always going to be pushing back on this, and uh, that example led to a lot of one-on-one discussion to
Mhm.
get that person's fears taken care of, so that they could see the benefits of the new way of doing things.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's good that you talked about fear because that was the next phase which I was going to come to, which is fear and anger. So now both of these, fear and anger, these are essentially emotional responses, something you just mentioned in the example as well. Uh,
Yes, they
any
are, and this is when we get a little bit deeper into the project
Mhm.
and people can see this is going to be real.
Right.
This is the point where people start having a realization. Um, they will see a lot of change coming. They'll know it's coming, and there's not a lot they can do about it. So you're going to get two responses to that. You're going to get a lot of fear. Oh no, my job is going to change. Fear. Years ago, I was working in a newspaper where we changed the workflow in the newspaper, and we had industrial action at one stage because people thought they were going to lose their jobs.
Right.
Meantime, we needed all those people and we needed more people. And it really, we had to deal with the fears at that stage.
Right.
The other group are the hard resistors, and they become very angry about now because now they realize it's coming and there's not much they can do about it. They feel powerless.
Right.
They feel powerless, and the only way of dealing with that is to shout out. So the banging head on the table is a good example of that. There's somebody who's pushed back so hard and he's not getting anywhere, and it's frustration and it's anger. And they're fairly clear because they're the ones who will become very intractable in meetings. They're the kind of people who sit in a meeting and go, "Oh, we can't do that," or "No, that's not going to work," and they become very negative about the entire experience. And sometimes the only approach is to actually derail them if they're not an important part of the project and they're causing a lot of noise. It's sometimes important to derail them, get them out of your project, or if they are an important part of the project, then this is the time where you have to take them aside and have one-to-one conversations. If you're in one of these giant projects where everything is coming, then you've got to get, if it's a large public project that's got a public-facing outcome, then it's your press team that's got to be there and singing and dancing in a way that the public is going to hear and not be afraid of the outcomes. And you're going to get a lot of cynicism because those people are angry now.
Yeah. And this actually I can connect to the whole return to work that's going around and doing the circles in so many industries now, because work from home is over and all companies are essentially asking employees to return to work now. Although the job market is not that good, as in that people might leave just because they are being asked to return to work, but this again is sort of a reaction to the change that is being brought about, right? On your projects, have you ever faced something like this where individuals thought about changing jobs or leaving this project just because this change is coming in?
Oh, certainly. And the graph has somebody leaving at the bottom end of this because they're now at the point of being angry and desperate. And one of the answers to being angry and desperate is to walk out. It's interesting you mentioned this return to work thing, because I did a job a little while ago where people had to be in the office, and I was promised a team of 30, and I only got 14 in the end because all the youngsters that we were getting were going, "No, I want to work from home." And I'd rather work for less money somewhere else because I can work from home if I do that. So you get violent reactions to this kind of thing at this stage. And sometimes that's for the best. I mean, if you've got somebody who's very negative and very unhappy about the project, and there is no clear way through it, then sometimes it's best for that. If that person wants to leave, you don't stand in their way. You let them go. If they're valuable and they're just being a bit precious about it, you might be able to talk to them. But really, by that stage, I think a lot of goodwill has been burnt, and they're people who don't really want to be around the company anymore because it doesn't coincide with where they see things going.
Right. Makes sense. So let's talk about the next phase, which is where we actually start winning. And this is the exploration phase, right? So how can you encourage stakeholders to basically explore, the potential opportunities that are going to come with this change, especially after this period of frustration and possibly there might have been some confusion, but we are looking at the brighter side. How do we ask people to, explore the opportunities that this change might bring?
And that's a very important part of this is you get to the stage where whatever you're delivering is getting to the point of reality. So it's not finished yet, but it's getting to the point of reality. And in a lot of programs, this is where the training happens. So I worked on a big rostering upgrade at one stage for security personnel. And it involved a lot of new technology going with this. And after all the uncertainty and the unions getting involved early on in the piece, because when you work with large industrial groups like that, there's often a union behind it as well. And there was a lot of pushback, And then they got to the stage where they got some training in all the new kit and how the new systems worked, and how things would be better for them because of that. And suddenly you got all these guys that were wanting to explore it. And that's what
Yeah.
happens is the new stuff is suddenly available. The new bridge opens for trial walks. There's one here where I live in Brisbane. There's a new bridge across the river that's going to be quite spectacular when it's open. And they offered a trial walk, and it was sold out weeks in advance because everybody wanted
Awesome.
to see what the bridge was like. And
Mhm.
that's what happens. So after all the yelling and screaming about, oh no, we don't like this and we don't want it, when you finally have the opportunity to try it out, and a lot of your naysayers will become silent at this stage because they'll be able to try it out. They become excited about the new thing and the new ways of doing things.
Right, right. Awesome, awesome. And that's when we move on to the final phase here, which is essentially acceptance. And what I really liked about this was we might think that, we are done. The project is done. People have sort of accepted it. But you mentioned you mentioned, the importance of continuous communication and even recognition during this phase. Can you walk us through that?
Yes. So again, two or three different things in this space. The first is the project ends.
Mhm.
Projects always end. And if you're a smart project manager, you think about what you're leaving behind. I think one of the good moves in project management over the last decade is this move away from contractual, I have this on paper, this is what I'm going to give you,
Right, yeah.
to trying to deliver the outcome. Um, and really, part of that is embedding whatever the outcome is in the community you're delivering it into. So let's say you're working on delivering a new software system somewhere, and the training has all been done, people are feeling confident about it. Then it's time to do things like hand out a certificate. You are now certified to use the system.
Mhm.
Or another example from a while ago, we put together a card for a specific segment of the disability population, and once we had given the first person their card, there was the opportunity to actually have a bit of a press conference around that and say, hey, this person's now got this card, which is going to benefit them. And that person's happy because they've got the card and they're now part of this new
Oh,
thing. And
awesome,
and
awesome,
it's
awesome.
really that whole thing of leaving a legacy behind the project is
Mhm.
the more you do of this, and for the project team as well, it's kind of important to celebrate that you've done it.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, right.
I'm
Agreed,
a big
agreed.
fan of ensuring that you've drawn a line under the project and everybody knows that it's done.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as we wrap things up, my last question has to be about any departing tips, final tips that you can give, especially for project managers to be able to differentiate between the two sets of people, right? People who have genuine concerns and people who are just resistant to this change. Any tips from you on how you can differentiate between the two?
I I made a comment, a light-hearted comment in the article about managing by walking around, which I think is still quite true. And somebody pointed out, hey, that doesn't work on big international projects where your teams are spread everywhere. But the
Mhm.
point remains, you have to talk to people. The basis of dealing with change is communication, and a lot of that comes down to face-to-face conversations with people. Um, One of the things I've done quite frequently on projects is use a pulse survey. Um, if you can't speak face to face with people, at least give them the option to talk about their feelings,
Awesome.
the
Mhm.
the worries they have, so that you're aware of them and you can surface them. And yes, sometimes they can be very valuable comments, and they lead to longer discussions that make for a better outcome anyway. So yeah,
Love that.
my biggest tip is probably go and talk to your stakeholders.
Awesome. Awesome. And Carlton, how can someone contact you if they want to?
Through my website, which is magnistrat.com. Uh,
All right.
I'm You may also contact me through the pm.com website. I'm present on that site, and happy to talk about this with people that want to hear a bit more about it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time out today, Carlton. I'm pretty
It's
sure
been
our
my pleasure.
community, yeah, I'm pretty sure our community is going to find this podcast very helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with me. It's been a pleasure.